Some people are heading to vote now. Others spent hours waiting through the day. We've gotten an onslaught of emails from people about voting issues at polling locations in several counties: Cobb, Clayton, DeKalb, Fulton, just to name a few. There have been reports of technical issues with these new machines. Also some reports of polling workers who did not know how to properly use them.
Cheryl, the problem's so bad that Georgia's Secretary of State announced he will launch an investigation into what went wrong in DeKalb and Fulton counties. Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms also responding, urging people not to be discouraged by the long lines and saying don't allow your vote to be suppressed, reminding folks to stay in line. The problem at Georgia polls also gaining the attention of the presumed Democratic presidential nominee, former Vice President Joe Biden. His team sharing a statement reading in part what we see in Georgia today, from significant issues with voting machines to breakdowns in the delivery of ballots to voters who requested to vote absentee, are a threat to those values and are completely unacceptable. We only have a few months left until voters around the nation head to the polls again, and efforts should begin immediately to ensure that every Georgian and every American is able to safely exercise their right to vote. By far, we have been hearing the most complaints out of Fulton County. Our John Shearick is there right now. And John, what are the lines looking like? Does it seem as if things have been smoothed out any?
Jennifer and Cheryl, you just summed up the whole day. We're at Park Tavern here on the southeast corner of Piedmont Park in northeast Atlanta. And look toward the end of the line. We can't show you the end of the line. It's out of our view from where we are right now. The people at the end of the line have ahead of them a wait of about 2 to 2.5 hours right now. The lines have been long and steady all day long at this location. The line wraps around up toward the street, the corner of 10th and Monroe here at Grady High School, and then wraps around again until it gets to the entrance, where there is another wait for people to check in and then finally vote. There are 2 precincts here voting here. That's because Fulton County lost so many polling places due to the pandemic, with different locations having to close and stay closed even though it's primary election day. And you just talked about some of the issues that have been plaguing Fulton County and other counties as well, with the new voting machines and with poll workers who have not really been trained well enough to troubleshoot some of the problems that are coming up with these new voting machines. And we're also told by the chief of Fulton County Elections that the pandemic had such a toll on his office, with people being out sick. He even lost a worker to death because of this pandemic, and so they fell behind in their absentee ballots, and so that is adding to the lines here, people trying to vote in person because they couldn't vote absentee. We have not heard yet whether the polls will remain open past 7 o'clock in Fulton County. That would not be unusual to get permission to do that. We just haven't heard yet if that is going to be the case. But of course, anyone who is in line, time the polls close, whatever time that is, if it's 7 o'clock or later, they will be allowed to vote.